I'm going to tell you a very dirty secret in this whole game of investing. A lot of us who invest, yes, we want to make a return, but really, we're investing for our egos. We're investing for our egos. We're investing because I feel like if I give 100K to this person and this person's going to be like, man, you're my mentor, you're going to change my life. It is ego.
How we're going to start is by analyzing your childhood, because I feel there's a lot to say about someone who's an entrepreneur about how they were raised as a child. So yeah, take us through that.
Childhood, I was born in Hackney in London, but then I went to live in Ghana for 10 years. I stayed with my grandmother and I basically stayed there until I was 10 years old. And then I came to London and I lived with my dad. And I basically, he and I lived in South London and we just chilled there. And then that got me into the whole world of business, entrepreneurship, all of that good stuff. Built first company at 14, built second company at 17, which we sold, and then built third company at 21. And then in between, there were a bunch of different failures, but so we don't talk about those.
So how did was there any traits you had as a child that you kind of knew you would be an entrepreneur?
No, because I actually wanted to be a journalist, and then I wanted to be a magician.
A magician, okay. Okay. I think entrepreneurship and magicians have similar.
um, Yeah, I think I have a TED talk on this actually, which is basically from the period of let's say 10 to about 17. I reinvented myself several times. Even the company I started at 14, I didn't really see it as entrepreneurship. It was a bet with a friend of mine that I wouldn't make £500 before I turn 18. And I was like, come on, I can easily make £500. And so I started a tutoring business. And so that was for me at that point, I wasn't like an entrepreneur. I was just a guy who figured out how to make money to win a bet. And even after that, I wanted to become a journalist. Yeah, so I've just been like constantly doing different things. And then it was only I think at 17 after like the first sale of a business. I started a business at 17. I sold it in 11 months for 110 grand, and I was like, that was more money than I thought was ever even possible in my entire life. And I was like, all right, I am going to do this for the rest of my life.
So yeah, take us through the second business at 17. Like, what was it? What were you doing? How did it get sold?
All right. So, how many of you guys spend a lot of your time, or at some point in your life, you spent a lot of your time reading about entrepreneurs, being inspired by entrepreneurs? By show of hands, how many? All right. This is good because this group is actually a very self-selecting group. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in entrepreneurship. So, I had stumbled across this blog called retireat21.com. It's still live. And I would just read that every single day after school. I could narrate every page, I could tell you every single story. And it was all about these young people who had discovered the world of online marketing and had basically built businesses throughout that process. Funny enough, quite a few of the people there now are my friends, and I find it sometimes surreal when I'm like, I used to read everything about you, bro. Like, I know everything about you. And and so I was reading that, and I was like, I'm into business. I like all these things. I'm going to start a magazine about business, and I called it Entrepreneur Express. And at that time, I was also the editor in chief of my school magazine. And so I was like, well, we can build an online magazine and an offline magazine. I can be an editor and then I can also be an entrepreneur. And I can build it all around business, entrepreneurship, all of that good stuff. And so that was the plan. And half the plan failed. And the reason why half the plan failed is because I was a donut and I didn't understand that to build a print publication, I needed to have advertisers. And so I actually got a lot of really great interviews. I interviewed Richard Branson, I interviewed James Caan, I interviewed Alan Sugar, I interviewed a lot of people who are now successful entrepreneurs. And the plan was to then make it into a physical magazine. And I reached out to entrepreneur societies at universities and said, next term, I would like for you to take this. But then, of course, what happened, as I mentioned, was that it ended up not being the case because I didn't know how to sell ads in a print magazine. That's actually a big lesson, by the way. I've now done enough businesses and I've invested in enough businesses where I can safely say that that advice about follow your passion is absolute BS.
I wanted to get into this because that is very controversial.
Yeah, I think that, you have to be able to, you can get a lot of things wrong if you get one thing right. And the one thing is, are you in the right trend? Right. So even though I had a lot of passion for the business, I had interviews with Richard Branson and all those people, and still print advertising was declining. And so by virtue of that, I could have been the best salesperson in the world. I could have had the best product in the world. But if like the trend is going this way, then what the heck am I trying to do going against the trend?
So for students that want to start a business, you would advise them to follow trends and then build a business within that space.
So I think that you have to follow the market, and you either have to be in a market that is neutral or ideally growing. And so that actually was the reason why. So I basically couldn't run the offline version. So I put all my attention into the online version. And this was when I was 17, so like 11 years ago. And um, I basically realized that I needed to drive eyeballs directly to my site. And the way to do that would have been through search, SEO, all that sexy stuff. But then I realized that took way too long. And so I came across the fact that I was spending so much of my time on Facebook. And this was during the heyday where you could grow Facebook pages very, very quickly. And you'd have all these big Facebook pages. It was kind of the growth of Lad Bible and those sort of people. And so what I did was I thought, well, these people have the audience. There are big Facebook pages about Tony Robbins quotes and Gary Vee quotes and motivation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take articles from my site and then I'm going to put it into the Facebook pages. And that's going to drive people back to my site. And that's the way that I'm going to get eyeballs. And I tried it the first few times. It's like, shit, this actually works, right? I was basically taking audiences off social, driving them to the site. And I thought, I'm going to now start building a network, building my own. And then that was the entire business. The entire business was basically we made advertising revenue on the site. And the way that we drove traffic was through these Facebook pages. And that was pretty much the big edge that we had there.
Brilliant. So someone approached you and was like, we want to buy this entity you've built off you.
Yeah, yeah. That was pretty mental. And do you know what? People often ask me what was the most impactful part of my entrepreneurship journey. And I think there were two things. People think it was the sale of the business, right? Because they go, dude, you made like millions of pounds. That was the time. And I think it's not. The biggest one was actually the first ever business I started at 14, when I managed to convince a stranger to pay me for tutoring services. Because what it does to your brain, it gets you used to asking people for money, and it gets you used to be like, oh, I can actually do this. And I say this to a lot of entrepreneurs is when you read a lot of business media, you kind of go, all right, my first company is going to be a unicorn. My first company is going to be $1 billion thing. And I think that's the stupidest thing you could ever do in your entire life. Because if you think about a business is like, it's a skill, right? And when you're learning any skill, you don't just go and be like, right, I am now going to jump into this ocean and I now swim, right? You start off very, very small. You start off failing, you start off learning. And that for me was even more important. And the second bit, going to the sale of the business, was the sale of Entrepreneur Express. That was mind blowing, right? Like, as I mentioned, I grew up in Southeast London, Oak Kent Road, quite a poor place. And this thing I'd been working on in my sixth form, someone had basically reached out to me and said, hey, let's partner up. And for anyone here, if you are running a business and someone emails you and is from corporate development, right? And they say partner up, that is code for we are thinking about buying your business. And I didn't know that. So the person emails me and he said, let's have a Skype conversation. And that's how you know this was ages ago, Skype conversation. And I said, sweet. But then they asked me to send over all my stats. So I'm sending over my traffic stats. But then I add the Facebook pages. For some reason, I then go, oh yeah, like these are the Facebook pages that I have. Thinking it's not worth anything. It's just like, yeah, this is all part of the business. And then we get on the call, and I remember this, he just says, hey, so rather than, partnering up, why don't we buy you guys? And I remember this phrase very well where he said, buy you guys. And I remember thinking, there is one guy, right? It's me, right? And I remember at the end, I was like, yeah, I'll talk to my team. Like, I am my team. And and yeah, and then he said, all right, cool. What would you want, etc. I said, I don't know you, blah, blah, blah. Come up with a number. And the number that we settled on was £110,000.
At 17.
Yeah. So the first bit was 70 grand and then 40 grand paid after 3 months after like some due diligence stuff. And that for me was so major. That for me was so major. I say this to so many founders. It's like, just get your first win. And your win doesn't need to be some astronomical win, right? Because you just want to prove to yourself that you are the sort of person who can do cool shit. Like, that's all you want to do. Because, you know, I was talking with my friend actually today. I don't know how many of you guys know Lad Bible by any chance? Show of hands. Okay. So the co-founder, Ari, is one of my best friends. And Lad Bible now, I think it's public now, they're worth like 260 million on the stock market. He started 8 businesses before that. Nobody knows him for that, right? Everybody knows him for Lad Bible Man. And the reason why is because he started them, some worked, maybe one made him like $1,000 or something, and he was like, "Woo, I made $1,000," right? And then he started several, and they didn't work. But what he also said was that first win he had, that first, the first maybe campaign that they sold for Lad Bible, which was, I don't know, £500 or something, that was way more significant than then, them being this incredible company here. So the lesson here would almost be, how do you reduce the pressure to yourself and not think that you need to go crazy from the jump? Because you just don't.
Amazing, Timothy. And I would love to now go into your third business, which was
Yeah.
the one
Yeah.
that sold for 8 figures. So this section of the podcast is called 0 to 6 months. So we really want to delve into everything you did to sort of find your co-founders, build your team, get that first round of investment. So yeah, take us through that. I know you're in your second year of uni, but explain how you found your co-founder.
So the first thing I want to really do, I guess, is talk about how we came across the idea. And then we can talk about the co-founder. Because when people say stuff like ideas are worthless, execution is all that matters. How many of you guys have heard that phrase? Yeah, that's bullshit. That's 100% BS. Because ideas are actually worth a lot. Because if you have a right idea, which is in the right trend, which is solving the right problem, actually that does very well to put you ahead of a lot of people. And you can work incredibly hard on a level 1 opportunity when you are bringing level 10 work ethic. So how we came across the idea of Fanbytes was we had tried a bunch of different businesses before. We tried a business called Bandsy, which was basically helping bands and artists to engage with their fans. There's a very funny story where the whole idea was, you get like big bands and artists and you say, hey, let's do a competition where you can engage your fans, etc. And there's a very funny story where we started this when I was like 19, and we'd email like info@adele.com and be annoyed that she didn't reply, right? Just like really, really stupid juvenile things. But anyway, that idea didn't work. But then we stumbled across this YouTuber who was also a musician. And he said, yes, I'm down to do a campaign to give back to my fans. And we did a campaign with him and it actually worked. As in, people bought merch so that they could do this amazing experience with him, Jake West. And instantly I thought, that's interesting. I thought this bands and artists thing was the thing, but actually this YouTuber thing is quite interesting. And then the most important thing was I saw someone do this in America, a company called NeoReach. I saw them basically do this like brands and influencers thing, connecting them using technology. I thought, oh, that's interesting. They seem to be doing well. I'm just going to do the exact same thing, but just do it in the UK. And I am very clear with the fact that I have never had a single original idea in my entire life. And I'm completely fine with that. And I think most entrepreneurs should also be fine with that. We kind of over glamorize this thing of you were in your bedroom and then you thought about this idea and the world is now a better place. It's like, not really, right? Actually, most people's ideas, some of my most successful friends, some of the companies I've invested in, I've invested now in about 25 companies. 90% of them are, yeah, so this was working here and then we decided to do it here. Now it's working. All right, yeah, sounds good. Do more of that, right? So anyway, so that was how we came on the idea. It was more like a process of iteration, and then we saw someone do it in the US, and then we came onto it. Co-founders. I had two co-founders, Ambrose and Mitchell. I met Ambrose at a leadership conference. We had just bonded over just a lot of similar things, right? We were both from Ghana. We were both from London. Unfortunately, both both our dads had passed away. So there was this kind of very emotional bond between two 20-something-year-olds who just really wanted to win in life, I guess. And so I met him off that leadership event. We just, yeah, like we just became good friends. I was working on a bunch of different things. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to ask him to join. Mitchell, I met as my CTO because basically I asked my other really smart friend and I said, who is the smartest person that you know? And he said, Mitchell. And I was like, all right, sweet, Mitch, you're in now. So it's quite good because like I was at Warwick doing computer science. Ambrose was at Imperial College doing mechanical engineering, and Mitchell was at Nottingham doing computer science. So you had these like three semi-nerds basically in like different unis building out that business. And so that's how I found them.
And how did you split your roles? What was your role? What was their role?
So by the end, our roles were I was the CEO, right? So I was really in charge of everything commercial. Ambrose was COO, Mr. Spreadsheet. That's the name that we gave him. This guy had a spreadsheet for every single function in his life. At some point, he had a spreadsheet which could determine the ideal type of partner he should have.
Whoa.
It like took all the dates that he'd had, how long they lasted. It was crazy, yeah.
Is he in a happy relationship now?
He just found God, actually. So, typical, right? Like, yeah, like guy gets rich and it's like, oh, it's not all about the money, it's about Jesus. All right, mate. But anyway, and then Mitchell was CTO. There's actually a very interesting story about this because I know this is about, telling the insight stories, right? Telling the things that people wouldn't actually know. A very interesting story is when Fanbytes was started, the aim was actually for it to be a pure software business. The reason why is because I really wanted to build a subscription as a service business because I thought they would get higher valuations. And then in our second year, the government came to us and offered us 100 grand to do an influencer campaign to promote the national minimum wage change to young people.
And why and how did they come to you? What were you doing at that time?
Because 70% of my time was spent speaking on stages, and they were in one of the stages. That's another thing that, again, is very useful to know. And I'll try and make this talk incredibly tactical, right? Because I really like when people are like, yo, just do this, and then you do that, and then you win. Sometimes you have to look at the stage of development in the market. And in some cases, if the market is not mature enough, you as the founder have to almost be the evangelist. So in 2017, 2018, people were still talking about these articles about, who are these weird YouTubers? They're in the bedrooms and they're just talking and they're doing all this stuff, right? Because people didn't understand the value of them. So as a consequence of that, I then realized that I would have to be the sort of person who goes onto stage and says, like, hey guys, influencers are a big deal. Social media is a big deal, right? And if I'm able to tell them about this trend and they buy into the trend, then they'll buy into Fanbytes, right? So something that I see a lot of founders make as a mistake I see a lot of founders make is that they don't acknowledge where in the market cycle they are. So at the beginning, if you're in a market that's like absolutely pumping, just almost like figuratively get a bucket and just capture as much water as possible, right? But if you're in a market that's emerging, you perhaps need to have a different go-to-market, which is I'm going to go out and be the evangelist. I'm going to go out and be the person who's actually gonna make it happen. So yeah, that was a split of our roles. There you go. To answer your question.
So when you split your roles, how did you get how did you get the first customer of your company? And how did you get your first team member? So first team member and first customer, I think would be important.
First customer paid us £300. It was Go Ape. By show of hands, how many know Go Ape? It's like, yeah, there you go. So you go there and you climb trees and shit, basically. So Go Ape, they paid us £300, and Go Ape were really cool. And the reason why was because, again, by the time that we sold the company, we're doing like 300 grand campaigns, but the first ever one started from £300. And so how we got Go Ape, because we did another competition with another YouTuber called Kira Rose, who was this just like a cool YouTuber. And the campaign was that a fan could win the opportunity to go to Go Ape with her. And so then I called Go Ape and I was like, hey, do you want to get involved in this? And then he said, how much? And again, I was like, I wasn't thinking about charging you, but if you're gonna offer, right? But again, it was like a ding where I went, oh, that's interesting. That's the opportunity there. And I think, again, to make this super tactical, because I'd love for people to just like leave with just do this, do that. I have seen this about 90% of the time, where the idea that you start off with is not the idea that you end up with, because you have a hypothesis and then Mr. Market, that's what I call him. Mr. Market is like nudging you across to something else. And so in that same vein, we didn't think the type of person like Go Ape would be our customer. We didn't think that's where the value was, but then it was. Same way, actually, the story I was telling about the government now, I remember the whole aim was to be a subscription business. And then government came, 100K to do the campaign. However, they did not want to use our software. They wanted us to run the campaign. And I remember very specifically, I turned to my co-founders and I was like, well, I guess we're now an agency then, boys, right? Because we started off as subscription, but then I was like, someone's offering us 100 grand to do this. Let's just do what they said. And I find this again with so many of the founders sometimes that I talk to, especially the early stage ones, is that they're so tied to their vision of the world when someone is basically like waving gold at them and saying, just face me and I will give you gold. And they go, nah, I don't want the gold. I'd much rather have lead because I want to be right. And the truth is, in business, I've seen a lot of people lose money by wanting to be right, by wanting to have their ego massaged and to be able to say, I was the one who did this. When really, if you really think about it, a lot of us, and this may be a bit contentious, but oh well, who cares? It is extremely rare any of us are going to be Steve Jobs. It is extremely rare any of us are going to be Mark Zuckerberg. There are people who are geniuses. Most of us are not business geniuses. I'm not a business genius, right? But what I'm able to do is just understand market trends and then understand how to place myself in market trends. Everyone here, you're not a business genius. But what you do have is enough intellect, and I'm hoping enough hard work to be able to spot trends, understand market realities, and then place yourself in it. As I mentioned, in fact, no, yesterday I was hanging out with my friend Alex McDonald, shout out if you watch this video. He sold his company to Capital One for $300 million. 2 weeks ago, I was hanging out with my friend Hussein, who started a company called Onfido, which actually came from Oxford. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of Onfido. Yeah, Onfido. He just sold that for 656 million. So when you internalize that and you realize that you don't need to be a genius in order to win in business, I think that is the most liberating thing you can. It's like, well, okay, yeah, I just do this, I do that, and then yeah, it works, right? And for so many of us, we have this sense of self-importance that the thing that we're doing is really going to change the world, when really it doesn't, right? I give the example of Hussein. Yeah, Onfido, great company, but it's also like identity verification. All right. It's not a new phone. It's not a new thing that's like going to change the entire world. But he understood the trend. He understood the business. He understood then the fundraising journey. He learned all of these things because he started it as a student in Oxford, right? He started it when he was 20, yeah. And he just ran the business. Yes, a bunch of failures. Yes, a bunch of successes. And then it all ended that. And he's not a business genius. He says to me a lot, he's just like, yeah, bro, that shit was kind of wild, wasn't it? I'm like, yeah, it was wild, right? But because he was almost humble in understanding that he needed to learn some things in order to then get to the end goal, rather than having this sense of, I'm a genius and I have to be a genius.
I was wondering, how do you keep yourself motivated? You know, you wanted a SaaS business,
Yeah.
but then you had to run an agency. What about if you didn't want to run an agency? And how did you keep yourself motivated to run something you didn't initially want to?
So, by show of hands, how many people here want to start a business? I hope everyone, because you're here, right? Actually, how many don't want to start a business? Pardon? Don't want to start a business here. By the way, it's also completely fine not to want to start a business. Okay, cool. Great, right? But for most of us, want to start a business. All right, now, in the spirit of being very candid here, how many of us want to start a business? Again, be super candid here. We're all friends here. How many of you guys want to start a business because you want to get rich? By show of hands. Okay. How many of you guys want to start a business because you want to solve like a core problem? Cool. How many of you guys want to start a business because you want to prove somebody wrong? Okay. How many of you want to start a business because you find business interesting, engaging, and fun? All of those four reasons were the reasons why we then decided to do an agency, right? Because I found it fun. I was like, cool. Whether this business was a SaaS or an agency, I'm still going to find the general idea of doing the business fun. I also want to prove people wrong, but really the person that I wanted to prove wrong was me. Like, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something significant.
What made you think you weren't significant? Like,
I mean, like my therapist, who I'm paying a lot of money, has a lot of stuff to do that. Being an only child, no siblings, living in Ghana for 10 years, I felt a bit of a feeling of needing to, be significant. There was that. I also thought it was a lot of fun. I also wanted to make money. I also wanted to like solve a core problem, because I was like, oh, this social media influencer thing, it actually brings quite a big problem here. I need to execute on that. And so if it was subscription, maybe. If it was agency, maybe. If it was bloody AI deep tech, all right, maybe, right? So I think it was an amalgamation of all those four. That was the reason why I thought I want to now I would just follow the market rather than trying to impose myself on it.
fair enough. And I was wondering, how did you raise your first round of funding? Who did you pitch to, and how did they give it to you?
So there was our first round of funding, and then there was our first round of funding. The first round of funding and how we raised it was like 25K or something, or like 15K. There is nothing you can learn from the first way that we raised our first bit of funding, because I wanted to work for this guy during my gap year. And he basically was like, you're too young, but you have a lot of confidence when you start your next business. I would like to be the first person in. So there's not much to learn from that. I'm not now saying go and try and work for someone, they say no, and then say, okay, but would you invest in business instead? Um,
What qualities did you have that he was like, whatever this guy does next, I want to invest?
I think I had boneheaded naivety. And I think that is a great thing a lot of people have in this room. We have boneheaded naivety. We basically have a sense of, why on earth would this not work? And people can sense that. Like, people, it's infectious when you hang with someone and they just talk as if the thing has already happened and they're just waiting for the world to catch up. A lot of people can see that. A week ago, I spoke to this 15-year-old guy who is doing this amazing thing on TikTok. And I genuinely was like, if you told me you are starting a religion now and you want me to be your first disciple, I will join, right? Because he just had this level of, well, this works and this works. So if you do this, I was like, yeah, it does, right? And you should really hold on to that when you're first getting started, because as you get older, it is very easy to then bend towards someone else's story. It is very easy for someone to say, well, this can't really work, and then you don't do it. So that was basically the way that that we got first. Now, properly, right? Properly, because by the time we had finished, we had raised 2 million for the business throughout the duration, but like 200 here, 500 here, 300 here. The thing you can learn from how I went to raise money was I actually identified people who had built a version of Fanbytes, but an older version. So one of one of the CEOs, not the founders, of a company called Dentsu. By show of hands, how many have even heard of Dentsu? Okay. How many have heard of WPP? Okay. So those are like big advertising agencies, like huge, right? And so what I basically deemed was if I was building what was considered the next form of marketing, then the best people to go to would be people who had built like the older version of it. So people who own like TV advertising agencies, marketing comms, where it was quite standard, like PR, radio, blah, 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 blah. People who did that, they will understand the problem that we're trying to solve. I find this a lot. I get pitched a lot, and it's by founders where I just think, how on earth did you think that I would be interested? You are running this like D2C vegan plant-based skincare brand which also uses AI. I'm like, what are you saying? Like nothing tells you that I will be good. However, there is someone who actually is a D2C expert who, if you then said to them, I am doing this company, it is tangentially linked to you, it will be far easier, because I'm going to tell you a very dirty secret in this whole game of investing. A lot of us who invest, yes, we want to make a return, but really we're investing for our egos. We're investing for our egos. We're investing because I feel like if I give 100K to this person and this person is going to be like, man, you're my mentor and you're going to change my life. It is ego. And I've spoken to a lot of people, a lot of our investors. Some of them were like, hey, I think you guys are going to do well. And I also want to be part of that story, so I can say that I was part of that story and I helped you do that. One of our investors is a guy called, how many of you guys have heard of a brand called Charles Tyrwhitt? Charles Tyrwhitt shirts, right? The founder, Nick Wheeler, is a very good friend, and he was one of our first investors. He put in 15 grand into the business. He did very well from it. He owes me a bunch of suits, actually. And he, after we sold the company, he said something quite profound. He said, I didn't understand what you were doing, but I had a feeling you guys would be successful. And to be honest, I didn't really care about the return, which makes sense. The guy's literally worth like 120 million. So he doesn't really care about like an extra million. He was more like, because I saw myself in you guys and I knew that by working with you, it would like give me a feeling of, give me a feeling of importance. And that's the thing with so many investors. Like, I invest, yes, we make some returns, blah, blah, blah. But really, it's because I see someone else doing something cool, and I'm like, I can live through them, basically, right? I can do this other thing through them. And that helps when you are pitching someone who's basically have an older version of the thing that you're doing, because then I can directly go, oh yeah, if I was building this company now, this is what I would do. So you always want to think about these sort of dynamics in investing, the people that you reach out to, the way that you sell to them. That's the way that we got our first funding, or our first few fundings.
That's fantastic. And you shared with us this insight. How did you know that was a thing? Like, I assumed, you're only 21. Like, how did
Well,
you
which
even,
one?
as in going to people to feed their ego?
Well, because when we started the first bit of investments, I realized they were basically all saying the same thing, which was, yeah, here's some money, but I see myself in you. It was also quite funny because like quite a few of them were white Swedish guys. Like, in me? But what they were saying was, if they were building a new company now in this space, this is how they'd build it. And a lot of the things I'm saying now are all things which I didn't know at the beginning, and then I learned afterwards. The one thing that I did know, and maybe we can come to it later, but the one thing that I did know was that this sort of business we started, Fanbyte, was a business that could end up being sold. That was like the one thing that I knew. I knew it was the sort of business which people would buy if we got to a certain level. And every other thing, how to hire people, how to do that. When we saw the company, we had 80 people. We done, I don't know what revenue, I think like 15 million or like 16 million or so in rev in like 5 years or something. And I was like, I did not know how to get there, right? The one thing I did know was like generally the idea was a good idea, but everything else I didn't know. And that's also completely fine for a lot of people here. There's a lot of stuff that you just wouldn't know, right? Like you just don't know how to hire a COO. Like you don't know how to build an org chart. You don't know how to build a board. You don't know how to fire someone easily. You don't know how to build a sales team. And that's completely fine because you can learn that on the job or learn from other people. Like you don't need to know everything and then jump. As was said earlier, you can jump and then figure it out on the way. And that's a far more liberating thing than I'm going to spend all this time to be ready, you know?
Brilliant. And now we're going to move on to a little game. It's called Would You Rather. It's got some audience participation. So I was wondering, I'll ask Timo first. Would you rather have dinner with Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates? And I
Oh,
would love,
Jeff
actually, no, I'd love
Bezos.
the, oh, you say Jeff
Yeah,
Bezos? Who
Jeff
says Jeff
Bezos.
Bezos? Is Jeff Bezos Jeff Bezos? Bill Gates. Okay, so everyone's, well, most people don't agree. So why Jeff Bezos?
I think Jeff Bezos would be more interesting. That's it, really.
Okay,
I can
elaborate.
go to the gym with him as well. So, yeah, Jeff Bezos, way more interesting.
Fair enough. Okay, would you rather have 500K or dinner with Jay-Z?
um, what's that meme that Jay Z would tell you to have taken the 500K? Um, I don't know. I would take the 500K and just dump it in some meme coin somewhere. Somewhere.
No dinner with Jay-Z.
No, no, it's okay.
Would you rather have dinner with Jay-Z? 500K.
Good. Good decision. Good decision. Turn the 500K into 100 million. Jay Z will ask you to have dinner with him. So it's fine. No problem.
And the final would you rather is would you rather visit the past or the future? Like before you were born?
Oh, that's good. I would rather visit the past.
Interesting.
I'd rather visit the past. There's a very famous quote: "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." And I would love to visit the past to see a bunch of really interesting human behaviors, so that when I am born, I can take advantage of those human behaviors. um, I think that would be way more interesting than being in the future. It's like, oh yeah, we had flying cars. That's great. I much prefer my car now.
Who would you most like to meet?
My first thought was Satoshi, the founder of Bitcoin, and say, "Hey man, can you give me some?" Um, but I don't know. No one interested. I think I'd just be like generally interested in. Do you know what? Actually, I would like to go to the past, and I would like to go to the '90s, but older, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Oh, that
Yeah,
vibe. Okay.
yeah. I was born in '94, and I would love because I have so many older friends who talk about the madness of the internet when it first started to be, and how just people were just talking shit about it, but also people were hopeful about it, and the nerds were coding, and the dot-com bubble, and all. I would absolutely just love to be in that craziness, just to observe it, because it really is a crazy time. Actually, just on that, just a quick note on that. It's kind of crazy to think that the internet as a thing was only maybe, I don't know, like 25 years ago. If you really think about it, most of us are in that weird transition where we had dial-up internet, and then we had broadband, and then we had this, and now we have 5G. Like we are so early, it's actually crazy when you really think about what an amazing time we live in to effect change, to solve problems, to come up with cool ideas, to come up with businesses, to to influence the world. It is actually crazy that we live in such a period. And earlier I asked how many people want to do businesses to make money, and then other people to effect change. I'm actually really happy that a lot of people said it was to solve a genuine problem. Like, Money will come by virtue of solving a genuine problem, right? But I'm happy that you're saying that. The reason why is because we have so many incredible tools out there for you to do that right now, to do that in this era, that it would be such a shame if you basically thought of an idea, you thought about problems, you thought about solutions, and then you said, yeah, but I can't. Because genuinely, there's no better time.
Brilliant. What an amazing point to end on. We're going to take it to you guys. Do you guys have any questions for Timothy? Please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, we'll go with you. Can you repeat the question for the camera?
What is the biggest mistake I made that I would like to convey to a group of early stage founders? The biggest mistake I made was letting my ego control my decision making. And I'll give you some very specific examples. When I first started getting into business, I genuinely thought that you had to, like be the Steve Jobs, be the Mark Zuckerberg, like lead by being a dictator, almost being like, this is my way or the highway. And then I found that a lot of my team members were leaving. I was like, oh, well, it's probably because of me. And it was because of me. And it's because I didn't realize that fundamentally building a business is building almost a collection of people who come together to achieve something. And I always wanted to be right rather than what does the company need. And that was something I had to really confront for the first 2 years of the business. I'll actually share with you our revenue graph. First year, 400K. Second year, 1 million. Third year, I think it was like, I want to remember, like 1.8 or something. Then fourth year, like 6.7, and then 13 million or something. It just went, right? That inflection point from 1.7 to 4 point or 6 point something, that was basically when I dropped my ego, right? Because at that point, I said, you know what? It's not the Tim show. It's not me wanting to be right. It's not like I need to be the person to come up with the answers. I'm going to create a space for other people to win and for the company to be right. That was probably the biggest mistake that I made. Because here's the thing, right? Like, unless you're trying to build some super, even that, man, even if you're trying to build some super deep techie thing, right? Nothing that we're trying to do is so outlandishly crazy that it can't be like tactically done. The big thing to figure out is like your mental state and making sure that you don't overcome yourself, like you don't sabotage yourself by fear or self-doubt or ego. And so checking my ego, or rather not checking my ego, was the thing that I think harmed me the most, and checking it was the thing that helped us succeed, because it then meant it was easier for me to recruit, easier for me to fundraise, easier for me to do things where I didn't need to be the superstar, basically.
Brilliant. Thank
I
you.
think you had one there. So I believe that if you have a full-time job, you should not quit your job until you have at least 8 months of runway. So the equivalent of 8 months salary. That is for me a very important thing. There is this doctrine online that you should quit your job and you should burn the boats and all. That's bullshit, right? That's bullshit, because I'm telling you, financial anxiety is real. Financial anxiety is very real. So the way that I tend to think about it is 8 months of cash from your business, which will then let you continually work on it. That is the point, in my opinion, where you should then leave your business and then go and pursue it. And the best way to validate any idea is money. Right? Like, at some point, even if you're spending a lot of time doing research and then building something in deep tech, someone's got to pay you. Someone's got to pay you for your solution. So the moment that you have proof, verifiable proof of being able to do that, and is able to cover 8 months of your personal cash and personal burn, that's the point that you then make the transition.
Brilliant.
I don't know, and actually, I am very happy not knowing. Um, this is the challenge sometimes, and this is not just a business thing. This is almost a life thing. I'm sure that everyone here has got it when you finish something, you graduate, you finish sixth form, and then everyone's like, "What's next?" And you feel like you need to have an answer to it. And that's actually what happened with me after the sale. I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do this B2B SaaS thing. I don't give a shit about B2B SaaS. But I said it because I felt like I needed to give an answer, right? So I don't know. What I do know is it will be something that fits my criteria of what gives me a lot of fulfillment. So, working with very cool, fun, smart people, small groups of them working on interesting business ideas. I've been doing a lot of M&A stuff, so helping friends sell their companies. That's been quite fun. That's been very fun. Because it's like a game, but I don't know, and I'm happy not knowing. Yeah.
Brilliant. We'll take two more. Evan.
There are about three or four things that I think really lead to a business being acquirable. The first thing is it something that can be valuable in the eyes of a bigger buyer? So here's what I mean. When I look specifically at Fanbytes, I thought, well, we're at the beginning of this social influencer wave. And I have seen this trend happen so many times where companies start off where they do just an independent thing. They just do TV marketing, they just do PR. And then what happens in this industry is that over time, the big advertising agencies will then say, do you know what? We want to buy you as a specialism so that we become a generalist. So that was one very tactical thing with Fanbytes where I was like, oh, there's a bunch of influencer companies. What's going to happen is some big company is going to want to swallow it. So now they can say they do influencer, PR, radio, blah, blah. And that's exactly what happened, right? So if your aim, again, this is if your aim is to at some point sell your business, you want to be able to make sure that you're in a market where there's potentially going to be consolidation in maybe, 5 to 7 years, which means that you're starting off as very independent and then you're going. The second thing, quite frankly, is what makes a business sellable is I'm trying to think of the best way to say it without sounding too crass. It's like, can someone make a lot more money with it as part of them than you can? So a very specific example is, for example, the company that bought Fanbytes, they were serving people and doing like 7-figure deals. They were doing huge, huge, huge deals. And they realized that if they could pair up influencer stuff with, say, paid media or Google search, etc., they could now take £1 million deal and make it like a £5 million deal. And so to them, it was like, yeah, maybe you guys can get 500,000 deals, 750 deals. But if we pair it up with what we're doing, we can actually create something even bigger. Because you have to think about this. And I'm going to say something which is going to sound so weird and odd, but selling a company is like selling any product, it's just got more zeros. That's it. So, and when you buy a product or service, you're buying it because of the value you think it can give to you, right? You buy something for £100 because you think you can get £100 worth more value from it. And that is the exact same way buyers think about it. If by buying you for, say, 10 million, I know that I can add another 15 million to my overall value, then cool. I just keep doing that. That's like, if I give you £1 and you give me £1.50, I just keep giving you pounds, right? And then the final thing as to what makes something sellable, and this is a very important thing about like team and dynamics, is it a system, is it a machine that can run independent of you? This is a very important thing. Now, at the beginning, you don't need to worry that much about it, but once you find something that is working, and again, if your aim is to build something that can be sold, you should start thinking about yourself less as the CEO and more almost as the orchestrator. You are orchestrating something to exist independent of you. So even during Fanbytes, there were quite a few times where I would take, say, 2 or 3 weeks off, and I will intentionally note where things broke. And I'd go, okay, we need to have a head of creative here because things keep breaking in here. All right. We need to have a head of finance here because people keep asking Ambrose for it. And if we have any intentions of selling the company, Ambrose should not be doing the finance. All right, cool. So we did these thought experiments because then by the end of the process, and we had a bunch of people wanting to buy us, we're like, here is the machine. We could die today. The machine will still work. This machine, if you put in £1, it spits out £2. Do you want this machine? Right? And so those are the three things that really contribute to a company being sellable. Ooh, have you seen my content before? Okay, great. Because that is actually teasing me up for a perfect story about how we turned down an 80 million valuation. Yeah, we had an investor offer us 8 million. Or was it? No, yeah, it was 8 million for 10%. And that would have valued the company at 80 million pounds. And we said no. And we said no. And the reason why we said no was very simple, because I realized the business was not worth 80 million. And I also realized something. And this is newsflash for every single person here who wants to do this whole like VC funding, blah, 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 blah. The moment that you take on VC money, you are basically signing up for building something that is not really what you want. It is to build something that the VCs want. I.e., you have to now, if you are valued at say 80 million, you now have to maybe sell your company for like 150 million for you to make any decent money. I don't know how many of you guys here have heard of something called liquidation preferences, by show of hands. Perfect. Great. That's how VCs fuck you over. Because what they do is they put a bunch of liquidation preferences when they invest in your business, which therefore means that you have to sell for a minimum of a certain number for you to make any meaningful money. I shared the story of my friend who sold his company for 93 million. He owned the majority of the business, and when they sold, he only had 800 grand. Why? Because he had raised VC money so many times that every VC had a liquidation preference. They needed to get a minimum amount. And so the first VC needed that, the second VC needed that. And so when they then sold, he basically was like, yeah, that's what's left for me. And so to your question, yes, I said no to that because I knew in my heart of hearts that Fanbytes was not worth that amount. And I knew that the moment that we signed up, yes, we can then have the headlines in TechCrunch and be like, yeah, Fanbytes raises is $100 million valuation. But then I'd still be trying to build this business and then it would just end up failing. So being very intentional about the true value of your business is very key.
I think we can only take one more question before we have to break for bubble tea. So,
Who wants more Q&A and no bubble tea? There you go.
but Timo would
Or
be
both.
around. So during the bubble tea. So
Yeah, I've also got to get a flight after this, but
okay.
right.
So yeah, one more question, please. I think we'll end with you.
That's interesting. Are you thinking about doing a personal brand? Okay, so I'm going to answer that question in two ways. I'm going to answer first about the ways that personal brand makes money, which is it doesn't actually make a lot of money. And the reason why is very simple, is because I don't sell anything. I don't sell courses. I don't sell any programs. I don't sell anything. I, in my Instagram bio, I say I'm just sharing things that I wish my 21-year-old self knew, and that's really it. I find it cool. I find it fun. I find it fun to basically like do this, but at scale to millions of people. Great. Now there are ways to do it. Speaking engagements do pay well, quite frankly, right? Especially with like banks. You know, banks pay like 30K for me to just talk about stuff, and I'm like, I cannot believe this is even a thing. Like, you are literally paying me like a junior person's salary for 30 minutes of my time. That is ridiculous, and I still find it insane. Um, but the second way I'm going to answer that question, and you may not like this, is that you need to have done shit to talk about. A lot of people are building personal brands because, yeah, I want to build a personal brand, but like, what have you done? Why are you credible? What have you done? So the key is go do shit and then talk about that shit. Don't just be like, I want to build a personal brand, because it's like, okay, every man and his dog wants to build a personal brand. There are some exceptions. If you are incredibly funny or if you are incredibly hot, that's it. Because we all know people on TikTok, both guys and girls, who just have a shit ton of followers because they're hot. I'm like, all right, unfortunately, God didn't give me that one, right? But he gave me the business one. So I'm going to do that one. So that's my answer to the personal brand thing. I would, don't build a personal brand just to build a personal brand, because there are a lot of people who want to build personal brands. Do something significant, which is why people will then follow you. That is the reason I have grown very quickly on social and in general, is because like people go, oh, this is a guy in his 20s who has actually done something which is very useful, very credible. And he's not like trying to like sell you a course or anything. It's just like, yeah, cool. So do this, do this. Maybe that might work. Don't do that. All right, sweet, done. And people just warm to that. So that's my answer to that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Timo. We'll end it there. Timo will be around with the bubble teas. But before we go, I want to say thank you so much to our sponsors at Barclays Eagle Lab, Block Dojo, and Entrepreneur First, who have made this event happen by sponsoring it. And I've actually got the bubble teas and the drinks, and Inspire Oxford as well. So yeah, thank you so much. And a big, big round of applause for Timo for being so real and sharing your insights. Thank you.
Cool.